Here, he looked at her seriously and said, "I simply hope that you won't embarrass us as a girl of this family." And here, we return to reality as she makes her way to Ian and the maid, saying to herself, "Just a little longer." And she heard the maids saying, "The way the other girl is acting now makes it clear. Just a little more time. That's all I ask for. How can we not have one peaceful day here? Poor Ivana and Ian. I completely understand the Viscount's feelings having a daughter like that. I'm not trying to keep Ian forever." And she continued to herself, "Our relationship will end very soon. It won't be long until my forced marriage, and even to the day of my death after giving birth to a child from a man I don't know. Until that day, I wanted to be able to appreciate the small things that Ian gave me. I wanted to be brave. So why doesn't he give me more time? After all, once everyone finds their great happiness, as punishment for all my sins, I'll be buried alone 6 feet deep anyway." And here she arrived. Ivana looked at her and said, "Madam?" And then, with anger, Ivana said to her, You dirty whore." Then she went over and slapped her across the face, saying, "Didn't I tell you not to touch Ian? I've warned you countless times to stay away from him. How dare you disobey me? You wicked, despicable creature, you damned whore." And there, Ian watched in silence. She clasped her hands and said, "Perhaps I should break my wrists." And here the maid, Ivana, wiped the blood from her mouth and said, "You should respect your position as a young lady from the House of Rote." This angered Elizabeth even more, but finally Ian intervened and pulled her away from Ivana. So she began to say to him, "Let me go! Leave me alone! Ian!" Suddenly the servants and those present were looking at her and saying, "What's happening? It's Lady Elizabeth again. Can't she behave properly for even one day?" So he looked at them in silence. Then he said to Elizabeth, "There are many eyes watching. Please calm down." And here Elizabeth said to him angrily, "You're doing this because you want to defend Ivana, aren't you?" And here he whispered to her and said, "I mean, it doesn't really matter if I defend her, does it?" Then he picked her up and walked, saying, "Let's go inside now." And here she said, "Put me down, Ian." And here when he returned her to her room, he said, "Ivana was right. If you get a fever and faint, the maids will get into trouble." And here Elizabeth said, "You're defending that woman again." And here he noticed her old shoes that she had brought from the storeroom. So he said, "These shoes, they look too small for your feet. Why did you take these shoes when they don't even fit you?" And here she said to him shyly, "It's none of your business. Give them to me." And when he dropped them on the floor, she rushed to them and said, "What do you think you're doing?" She took them and cried, saying, These shoes." And at the same time she was thinking to herself, "It felt like my heart had been completely ripped out and thrown on the ground." But Ian looked at her and said, "Isn't this funny? In less than 2 months you'll have to stand before the altar and swear purity and devotion, and yet here you are embracing the shoes that a lowly servant pulled out of the water for you as if they were your greatest treasures." And here he approached her and said, "Shouldn't you be completely devoted now to devoting yourself to your husband?" And he held her face and looked at her, and continued, saying, "A busy woman like you shouldn't care who I meet and what I do with them. Should she?" And here she remembered what happened to her 5 years ago, and the maids were moving things, and here they were told, "Please move this thing here, stop playing. Shall I put the drinks here? Hey, can you set up the tent?" And suddenly Elizabeth came, and here they looked at her and said, "By the way, why is Mrs. E here? And why is she dressed like this for a workers' party?" And here Ivana said to Ian when she saw Elizabeth, "There's the reason. That's too much. She's dressed so vulgarly she looks ridiculous. If I were her—" And here Ian told her, "Just go and do your tasks." "Okay." And when she left, Ian turned to look at Elizabeth and said to himself, "Is this the reason that made the maids run like this in the early morning? How sweet she is." And here she turned to him, laughing, and said, "Ian, there you are." And here Ian felt embarrassed and clasped his hands, then turned to the other side and didn't pay her any attention. And here Elizabeth said to him, "Wait, Ian." But he left. And here she started saying to herself, "Didn't he hear me call him? Or does he not want me to come here? My feet are starting to hurt. Should I go back now?" But suddenly Ian came and said to her, "Madam, I've prepared a place where you can rest. The sun is very hot, so why don't you come with me?" And here she agreed and said, "Okay." And she went with him and sat down. And he said to her, "Please relax here for a while." And here Elizabeth said to him, "Where are you going?" And Ian said, "I need to finish the task that the butler gave me." But Elizabeth said, "Can't you just stay here? It's very hot today." So Ian looked at a maid and said to her, "Hey." And she said, "Yes?" And here he asked her and said, "Bring something to drink and eat for Mrs. Elizabeth." But the maid, in anger, said to him, "What? Why don't you get it for her yourself?" And here Elizabeth felt angry at the time when Ian said, "All right, I'll get it for her." So he turned to her and said, "I'll be right back." And she smiled and said, "Okay." Then she sighed and took off her shoes, saying, "It's okay to take them off for a short while." Suddenly, a group of dogs appeared, and the maids screamed, saying, "Oh my God, where did they come from? Damn it, they're stray dogs. Did they come after smelling the food?" Suddenly, one of the dogs took Elizabeth's shoe and threw it into the lake. And here she went and was about to jump into the lake to get the shoe. So the servants looked at her and started saying to each other, "My shoe. Are you planning to jump into the water barefoot? Does this mean she took off her shoes? Oh my God, how can a noble lady commit such a rude act by showing her bare feet? Will she return to the castle in this way?" At the same time, Elizabeth was feeling sad and saying to herself, "What should I do? If I embarrass myself more—" Ian was taking off his clothes and went to get her shoe, and he managed to do so and brought her the shoe, saying to her, "If we clean it and dry it by the fire, it should be fine." And here he gave it to her with the roses and said, "Oh, and please accept this too. I meant to give it to you after I was finished, but they got a little wrinkled." And here she looked at him in astonishment and said, "They're for me?" And he said, "Yes." And here she took them from him and smiled, saying, thank you very much, Ian." So this shoe became very valuable to her. But Ian was saying to her, "You will have to bring another man to your bed soon, my lady. That's why I asked you how my work with other women would concern you. Does your fiancé know that you were clinging to me and screaming with pleasure every night?"